Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes before we start. All right, I'm going to jump in with a couple of technical things. Thank you again for coming today to our second LSA office hours. We have a chat that we will be putting links throughout the meeting today. You cannot use the chat though, so if you have any questions throughout the meeting, you can put them in the Q&A. As well as if you have any technical difficulties, you can put those in the Q&A as well, and our tech assistants will help you out with that. So I will go ahead and get started. Today is our second, as I mentioned, LSA office hours. We had our first one on November 10th. These are for anyone working on the LSA data cleaning and review process. So if you are part of that process for your COC, you're in the right place. Last meeting, our first meeting, we talked about the submission process, the LSA submission guide, and HMIS data standards manual, as well as did a demo of the HUD HTX 2.0 and what's new this year. That recording and those materials have been posted to the HUD Exchange. We will drop that link in the chat. The link is also in the email you received to register for this office hours. So, and it will be in those emails going forward. We'll be sending out the registration for next week's office hours later this week, and there will be the link to all of the materials in that as well. And going forward, as we post things, we'll send out information via the HUD Exchange listserv, as well as these registration emails. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking about common flags and common issues that you experience while working on the LSA, as well as the resources that we have that can help you address those common issues. So we have Victoria and Jesse here today going to be talking about the Common Flags Library, the Common Data Quality Issues Doc, and the DQ tool. We also have a host of other people, panelists that will be answering questions in the chat. We have a pretty full agenda today, so we will try to answer questions verbally as we can, especially those kind of more difficult ones to explain via text, but we might be primarily responding to the chat, and we have a bunch of people planning on doing that today. Next slide. As a reminder, we are now in the data cleaning and review phase. What that means is that hopefully everyone has attempted an upload by this point. And if you had a successful upload, you've been able to look at some errors and warnings. If you had a failed upload attempt, that means that you either need to work with your vendor or maybe reach out to us for those of you getting red banner issues or whatnot, to help figure out how to get a successful upload. If you haven't had a successful upload, but you're still working on all of those things, that's totally fine. That 18th deadline is a soft deadline and just meant to kind of keep you on track to make sure that you can get everything cleaned up before January 11th. speaking of the people who have had successful uploads and have already started looking at their errors, addressing warnings, etc., there have been some issues that have come up. And so real quick, before we dive into our agenda, we're going to have Sean Morris come on and kind of give you an update on where those things are at.
Thanks, Kira. So just in the chat now, I've just included a link to what we refer to as the Weebly page that I'll share my screen now to show you all. This is the source of the most authoritative information about any issues that might have you might have observed in HDX so far. So just wanted to review some of the outstanding issues that we have now. There's basically these two sections of the page, the outstanding issues page, which are things that we've yet to resolve, and then the resolved issues, which are all things that we have addressed so far. So we did want to address probably this biggest and most important issue so far, which is that there have been some confirmed reports of COCs losing notes and or warning flag statuses. So we are putting in some patches as we speak now to address these, and hoping that we can correct that issue before the end of the day today, more likely by tomorrow. And we'll keep you updated with any updates about that. There are also some issues that some of y'all might have observed with flags displaying without descriptions or variables. This is not an exhaustive list of the flags that are experiencing these issues, and that's another thing that we're hoping to address in the push that we're putting out very soon. This is a smaller issue with one flag in particular at 785, where the flag is incorrect. You still ought to be able to leave a note in that flag without issue. And then another issue addressing a smaller number of COCs at this point is that some folks are experiencing a server error when they're trying to upload new users to HDX. So we're hoping to address all of these with the push that we're hoping to put in place, again, likely tomorrow. So, but otherwise, please just keep checking this Weebly website for any updates. We'll continue to refer to that for the most authoritative information. If you want another shorthand way to access that, it's linked right up here in this banner on the LSA page. So those are the things that we'll continue to monitor, and we'll update you as soon as we have more information. So that's all I was interested in sharing now, and I'll be in the chat to monitor any questions that arise to follow up with that.
All right, thanks, Sean. Let's talk about the Common Flags library. Next slide, please. So first, the updates to the LSA flags. So unlike last year, both errors and warning flags are now in HDX 2.0, but that is not the only change that the flags have gone through. So first, a majority of the flag text has been updated to be more user-friendly and descriptive. Second, some classes of flags have been updated to include flag variables directly in the flag text or the description. So what that means is that you're going to see things like the names of your projects or exact counts or percentages within the flag description itself, instead of having to rely on the flag variable table. Some flags also have new variables that are going to let users know what the difference is between certain counts. And that was something that HMIS admins asked for last year. Now, the Common Flags library has also been updated with those flag text changes, and all flags in the library now include a plain language description. Next slide, please. So the LSA Common Flags library includes 117 flags currently, both errors and warnings. You might be asking, why not all the flags, Victoria? Because there's like 30,000. That's not an exaggeration. There's about 30,000 distinct LSA flags. And so we tried really hard to narrow down the flags that we get the most questions about. And certainly the flags that are in the flag library also are relevant or relate to a number of other flags within a specific range. There is also in the Common Flags library, if you have had a chance to look at that resource before the office hours, there's a new single flag lookup feature that was not available last year. So we are going to demo that here in a bit. Next slide, please. All right, so before we jump into the live demo, just to give you kind of a quick taste of what we're going to be looking at here in the next couple of minutes, we're going to see where the LSA Common Flags library is, where you can find it on the HUD Exchange. And then we're going to look at a small flag example. You know, how do you use the flag library in general? How do you use it to respond to a flag that you're getting? And what do you do if there is a flag that you're getting from your data set that is not in the Common Flags library? Do not fret. There are some strategies I think that we can rely on in situations like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so on the HUD Exchange, the Common Flags library is located on this page, Guidance on Common Data Quality Issues. Actually, no, it is on this one. My bad. The LSA Common Flags library. I've got all the tabs open, please excuse me. And this link, as well as other links, are going to be included at the end of the presentation. We've got a slide dedicated to all of these resources, but I just wanted to give you all a sense of where you can find this. It is a Excel document. We'll open that up. All right. You may find that you need to enable, might open up in protected view. But once you've got all that taken care of, you'll be right into the Common Flags library kind of welcome page. It gives a little bit of an introduction to what the Common Flags library is and how to use it. There is also a tab dedicated to general resources, things that we feel are relevant to the LSA data quality and cleaning process. The third tab is where the meat of the information is. All of the Common Flags library, excuse me, all of the flags in the library currently included are listed here, along with things like category, ID number, the LSA files that have been impacted, and the description. I feel like I might not be sharing what I should be sharing. I am. Yes, I am so sorry for those technical difficulties. Are you seeing my Google screen now? Not Google screen, Excel.
We're seeing Excel now.
All right, my goodness. Okay. You'd think I wouldn't have done this like 1,000 times already. So let me just start from the beginning. Once you've opened up the spreadsheet, you'll be taken to the Flag Library Welcome tab. Just gives a little bit of information about the Flag Library and how it works. Next tab is for General Resources. And then the third tab is where all of the flags in the library exist all together. So you'll have the category, ID number, LSA flags that are impacted, as well as the description that you will see in HDX, as well as the plain language description. So just like, what does all of this even mean? You also have columns for possible causes, resources, and then information that is needed to resolve the warning. So we do have some errors included in the Common Flags library, and so we'll be very specific there that errors cannot be explained with notes. But for warnings, there are little bits and pieces or nuggets of information that we think might be helpful for COCs to take into consideration as they are crafting their notes for these warnings. So the flag lookup tool takes what we saw in the Common Flags library, in the Common Flags library tab, what a mouthful, and just puts it on a single page. So right now, let's look at our utilization flag example. So I went ahead and typed in the flag ID number, 1003, and that will bring up the exact flag if it exists in the library. And we'll go over a little bit what it might look like if it does not. So here you'll have the description, plain language description, possible causes, resources, and then information needed to resolve the warning. So for this particular flag, the warning is saying that the utilization is low, under 65%, for all households in emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing. And now that might be accurate. You might see that when you look at your data, everything looks to be as you would expect. And so you're wondering, well, how do I explain this in a note? And so the information needed to resolve warning that is given here is just asking to describe why the utilization rate for the project type and or household type was lower than expected, right? So there's some examples where the project of this specific type only active for a short period within the reporting period, where any local ordinances put in place that may have impacted clients being served, was inventory impacted by infectious disease, right? And so you could just kind of use that as a sounding board to sort of craft your response in your note. And in general, what we're looking for in notes is just context into what is happening with your projects on the ground. And having that context is really critical for us when we are reviewing data and using it for analysis purposes. So really just to get a broader understanding of what is happening on the ground with your COC. This is what it looks like if there is a flag that is not in the library. So this is flag ID number 1007, and you will see if you type in a flag that doesn't exist in here, you'll just get a whole bunch of NAs. Very sad. The trick, though, is that a lot of the flag IDs that are close in number they're related to each other. So one thing that you might want to do as a strategy is look into the Common Flags library and determine if there are any flag IDs that are close in number to the ID that you're seeing on your end in HDX. And if there are, you can utilize that and use the information still in the Common Flags library to help you craft an answer. So for example, in that early 1000s range, it's all about utilization, average utilization. And so I could go back to our original flag that we were looking at, 2003, and sort of use this to help craft a response, right? Because the resources are going to be fairly similar, if not the same, across flags that are similar in number. So that I think that is a strategy that you could employ when you are faced with a flag that is not in the library. And certainly we do have plans to update the library with the most common flags that come up for each LSA reporting cycle. So we are still going to continue adding to it. All right, next slide, we're going to be talking about common issues. Next slide, please. All right, the common issues. Yes, thank you. The common data quality issues that we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes can be found in the Preparing for the LSA Guidance on Common Data Quality Issues document. All right, next slide. So first thing that we'll talk about here are the reasons for errors in warning. So like I mentioned, there are about 30,000 distinct flags. They're all applying the same logic to determine three things. Did the vendor program the export correctly? Did the HMIS admin set up the data correctly? And did the HMIS end user enter the data completely and correctly? And if that is a no for any of those three, that is what triggers errors and warnings. For errors, there are two types. There are an upload error and a format error. We're thinking of like something is structurally wrong with the file. So maybe there's something wrong with the format, something wrong with aggregation, maybe there's a missing column or an incorrect date range. You also have data errors, so that's the second type of error. That's when something about the data is not possible. And then last, warnings are something about the data that is unexpected. So, we just had an example about the utilization rate for a shelter being unusually low. Not impossible, but certainly something that we would want to dig into and understand if that is accurately reflecting what's happening in the community. The list above that we have here, that is not comprehensive. And I do want to note that data issues have to be fixed in HMIS. So vendors can help find the source of data issues. If the data is accurate, that's when you enter a note in HDX to explain the issue. But for instances where you find that the data is not correct and is not accurately representing what is happening or going on in your projects or in your community, that data must be fixed in your HMIS. Next slide, please. All right, so what is a vendor issue? So you've likely noticed by now that in HDX, we've got a new column. It's that little screenshot in the top right there, vendor COC issue. Issues marked as vendor issues are likely to need vendor assistance to identify and possibly resolve. And again, like any other issue, it could be due to a programming error, a setup error, or a user entry error. Many of the vendor issues are checking if the sum of values across the project types or household types equals the total value. So we've got a little example there on the right-hand side. In that blue box in the middle, we have number of adults. And the first two lines are adult only, 500, adult child, 200, and child only, 100, for a total sum of 800. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that seems incorrect to me because children are not adults. And so the question there is the sum of AO plus AC plus CO, or adult only, adult child, and child only, equals the total adults? And so things like that is what vendor issues are checking for. Next slide, please. All right, inventory. This is a big one. And we get questions about this all the time. You'll see in the Common Flags library that a good chunk of the flags in there are either directly related to inventory or they're related to utilization, which is related to inventory. So in regards to inventory, we need to know the capacity of each project by household type. One second, I lost my place. My mouse stopped working. Okay, so at a minimum, an HMIS must have an accurate record of bed and unit inventory information for all continuum residential projects. That includes non-HMIS participating projects, and that includes rapid rehousing projects. We get questions about that all the time. It's important to note that inventory reporting for rapid rehousing is different between how you report on the HIC versus how you report in HMIS. So I'm going to be referencing the HMIS data standards a lot in these next couple of slides. There is an entire section, 2.07, that is dedicated to bed and unit inventory information, and it provides I'd say a number of different methodologies on how you should be reporting your bed and unit inventory information dependent on the project type. Next slide. All right, another big thing with inventory, utilization. What impacts utilization are incorrectly entered or maintained inventory. So inventory counts should be accurately recorded within the last week of each of the months of January, April, July, and October, and that is to satisfy APR and LSA inventory accuracy. COCs should attempt to backdate the date associated with the revised inventory to the actual date that the significant inventory change occurred. So more frequent updates for significant changes are encouraged, but they are not required. On that note, COCs are not expected to update small variations in inventory that are temporary. So significant is kind of a vague word, but we are certainly, COCs are certainly not expected to go in and make records for like 2 or 3 beds that only were added for a small, short amount of time. And then other impacts to utilization include missing exit dates and missing entry dates or missing move-in dates. Now, the move-in dates only apply to rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing for the purposes of the LSA. Next slide. All right. This slide is really just to acknowledge the fact that there are several challenges to tracking inventory. First of all, we're often not talking about a count of physical beds. And related to that, lots of projects don't have a set number of beds and units. Like I said, the HMIS data standards has different methodologies provided depending on project type. So how you would enter inventory for emergency shelter is different than how you would enter inventory or calculate inventory for rapid rehousing. Bed units are often not restricted by household type, though they have to be tracked as if they are, which is kind of crazy, but there you go. The inventory at HMIS, there's the expectation that you are breaking out these beds and units by household type. So how many beds are available for adult child households? How many beds are available just for adult only households? Again, the methodologies provided in the data standards goes into how do you make those household breakouts. And then if there is a capacity change, the last person to know is an HMIS admin. So that is probably one of the trickier parts that a lot of providers are operating as they need to, and changing that inventory when their needs change, right? Which is what we would expect and hope that they would do. But then that information does not get to HMIS admins very quickly. So thinking about that lag and trying to make a plan of when you should review your overall inventory. And I'm speaking as a former HMIS admin for a rural balance of state. This was very hard to do. We just had a lot of projects and it was hard to collect this information. And so there was a lot of planning at the front end of like how we would get this information and when we would get it. And that was also, tied very closely to the housing inventory count and point in time process. So there's a number of different ways that you can approach getting that information in a timely manner. I will reiterate that the HMIS data standards is a really good place to start to get that planned out for your communities. And I will pass it on to Jesse.
Thank you, Victoria. All right, so still talking about inventory because it is a complex topic. We want to give just a little bit more information about this. So let's say that you've got a project which started October 1st of 2018. Now these years are outside of the period, so don't let that confuse you. We just didn't update the years in the slide. Okay, so project that started in October of 2018, it started with 45 beds. 20 of them are for adult-only households. 25 of them are for adult-child households. You then become aware later on in the process that there's been sort of a shift in terms of the proportion of beds that are being used for adults only versus adult child. So then in October of 2019, you add another 10 beds to your adult only inventory for a total of 30. But you got to take those beds away from that 25 bed record. So you end that entire record and then you create a new record which has 15 beds. So this information has gone over more in depth in the preparing for the LSA Common Data Quality Issues document, which I believe was dropped in the chat a little while ago. And if not, then Juliana will drop that link here in a moment. All right, let's go ahead and keep on rolling. So what other kinds of common data quality issues do we see when it comes to the LSA? Every household should have exactly one head of household. There's a few things that tend to happen where that kind of goes awry. So the first one is where a group of people come in together and then the head of household exits and nobody ever went back and designated someone else as the head of household and removed that designation from the original person. So that's the way that that should work, is if the head of household exits, you go back and from the beginning of that enrollment, designate somebody else as the head of household and remove that designation from the original head of household. The other is when an HMIS sometimes assumes that the household composition is the same between enrollments, but where the head of household doesn't enroll in the next enrollment. So you got 3 people together, and then 2 of those people come back, and the head of household's missing out of that enrollment. The next one is it assumes that the same thing, that there is no change, but the people who were in the previous household are now presenting as a single household. So you've got, in that case, you've got sort of 2 households that come together as a single household. And then there can be all sorts of other data entry errors that just nobody ever designated somebody as the head of household. Okay. Other household related things. So every head of household needs to have a client location. So especially if that designation changed, just making sure that you went back and added that client location in. That is not a field that every HMIS implementation actually sees. A lot of HMIS implementations, if you have a single COC that's being served, sometimes it'll just be a default and the user's not actually seeing that value. Okay, just in general, when there's improper entries, move-ins, or exits, especially when part of the family or part of the household is joining or leaving during part of the enrollment, right? Things can get kind of strange. So just making sure that all those dates are making sense. Then also in relationship to the project dates, somebody can't join a project before the operating start date of the project. And you can't have an exit date that is after the project has stopped operating. Or in the case of not having an exit date at all and the project has stopped operating. So all those things need to be cleaned up. Another area of pain and complication is around overlapping enrollments. So this is a little table that kind of explains a few of the things that we tend to see. So in general, we don't expect there to be days where people are in both, let's say, an entry-exit emergency shelter, like in this scenario, and in another entry-exit shelter, which is what's shown here. So they came in on the 1st of January, they left on the 7th of January, but they also came in to this shelter on the 5th of January and left on the 15th. So they were in 2 shelters on both the night of the 5th and the night of the 6th, which doesn't really make any sense. So we ask that you check those things, and to help you check them, because there's a lot of logic that goes into this, because obviously there are times when an overlapping enrollment is expected. So for example, if somebody's enrolled in an emergency shelter and they're enrolled in rapid rehousing, but they don't have a move-in date yet, that's totally fine and not a problem, right? So we have some additional information to help you sort of sort through those things. It is this document here called the HMIS Dual Enrollments and HIC Duplicate Inventory Training Resource. That is a mouthful. And it goes through and talks about the different ways in which overlaps can happen and whether or not they're physically possible to happen and therefore allowed. But we also have a tool that will help you identify these things. I'm actually going to demo for you, potentially starting with this next slide. Let's see what the next slide is. Oh no, we got one more slide and then we're going to do a demo. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the data quality tool. Let me back up for just one moment here. So last December, we released a beta version of this tool, and then in January, version 1 came out. So when the LSA came out, there were all of these flags that were built. The majority of those 30,000 that we talk about are actually looking for programming errors. So they're looking for things where like value A has to be greater than value B. So if it's less than, it's being flagged because somehow something went wrong with how the data were aggregated, right? But some of the things that it was finding have to do with logical relationships. So for example, when a household doesn't have a head of household. And so the LSA would flag that information. And if you've been working with the LSA prior to last year, you'll know that you would have a situation like, okay, so we've got 3 flags where there's no head of household, but we don't know who those households are. And then on the app side of things, we also don't know who the households are because the data has already been aggregated, so we can't give you client IDs. So this tool was designed to help sort through some of those logical things and build those more complex queries than many HMIS admins typically encounter. So in order to do that, though, we need to have client level data, which I mean, not us. You need to have access to your client level data. So we built this tool in Excel. Folks download it. They export what is called the HMIS CSV, which is not the same thing as your LSA. It's not the same thing as your APR. It's called the HMIS CSV. Store that in a secure location. And then you tell this tool where that's located, and it queries the data and provides you with various logical checks, such as, do you have the right number of head of households? We developed that tool in Excel because it's widely available and it doesn't require communities to have their own server, things like that. But we have a few things planned that I'm also going to talk about before I turn the mic back over to Kiera at the end here. Do want to point out, though, that the scope of this tool is different than the LSA itself in terms of the number of project types. You can run that HMIS CSV for your entire HMIS database. And therefore, it might tell you, hey, you got somebody who has a date of birth problem who's enrolled in street outreach. When you resolve that error, it doesn't affect your LSA because street outreach is not involved in the LSA. So this little handy dandy chart tells you, do we expect there to be client data for this project type? And do we expect there to be project descriptor data for that project type? And this kind of lays out what the differences are between the scope. So the data quality tool involves all of these project types if you include them in your export, but the LSA includes only those where there are X's. All right. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. 1 second, let me get lined up. All right. So we put the link in the chat for the CSV data quality tool. When you go there, it will bring you to this page here. When you click on these links, it will take you to our Bitbucket site. And this is where you download the tool. You can also access the instructions here. This is an Excel workbook. So when you open that up, it will look like this. So at this point, if you're using this tool, what you need to have done is gone in and exported your HMIS CSV. I'm going to say it one more time. It's not the APR and it's not the LSA. Okay. If you're not sure how to get that file, you can just ping your vendor and ask them, and they will tell you where it's located in your system specifically. It is vendor specific, so we can't give you instructions on how to actually generate that information. And we're going to go in here and we're going to click this locate and check the CSVs. So we click this button. It says this program is going to locate your CSV files and check that you have all the necessary ones. So the first thing that we want to do is find out, do you have the right files for us to be able to do this check? And so if you have run your APR CSV on accident, this is going to error and tell you that you don't have what you need. So we're going to hit OK. We're going to assume that we ran the correct file, and we're going to go over and find that file. You can follow me down this little rabbit hole here. All right. Now, if I'd actually clicked into that last folder, it would have looked empty. And that can be kind of confusing. But all I'm actually telling this is what the path is to find the files. I'm not telling it to open the files. So if you get to the end and your file folder is empty, that's totally okay. Just hit the OK button. And congratulations, we now have all the CSVs that are needed to utilize this tool. I'm going to hit OK, and then this little tab is going to pop up. And this is saying, hey, is the file in the folder? Yes, it is. It also gives you a count of records. What's nice about this is that if you are a COC that has 50 different organizations and you look and see, hey, there's only 2 here, that might be an indication that something's gone wrong with your CSV, right? It'll also let you know if you're missing a column. Sometimes this will happen if there's been a change to the CSV specification, then maybe the vendor didn't catch it and the column was misnamed or something like that. That's usually what causes this missing column thing. And then whether or not the file is required in order for us to do our checks. Now, if you know the HMIS CSV, you might know that I think it's 27 different files. Not all 27 are listed here. We only list the ones that we're going to reference in the code. But depending on the types of projects that you have in your community, you may not actually have any data inside of your services or your current living situation file. So that is therefore not required. All right, so the next thing we want to know is, do you have any invalid values in your file? What that means is if you've got a date field that is actually coming up with a string, or it's coming up with a, any other invalid value. The other thing that we often see is where you have a null value where null is not allowed. To save us some time, I'm going to fast forward into the future here and pretend that that validation already ran. Oh, hold on. I have a few things open, so it's getting kind of mad at me. So that will open this tab. We'll pretend that this one's not open yet. We're using our imagination here. Okay. Now, you might get just as lucky as we just did and find out that you actually have no problems in this file. If you did, what you would see is it would say like maybe 1 or 7 or whatever. It'll tell you the percentage that that represents for the whole thing. And then you would be able to click on this cell and it would tell you, hey, here's the client IDs that have that problem with that particular data element. If you come here and you actually have a number of these things that are sort of lit up, if you will, and that you have some problems, you can hit this export all flagged records, and it will give you an Excel file that has all of the records involved with all of these checks, so that you can look into it and see what the problem might be. These are generally related to programming, or there are things that we wouldn't expect an HMIS to be allowed to do. So you will want to clean these up as you go, but some of them are not like critical issues. So for example, if your race quality was don't know, but then you also had a value of Asian equals 1, well, those things are not compatible. So that can't possibly be correct. But in terms of evaluating performance, or in this case, data quality, from a logical check standpoint, that's not so much an issue. Okay, so once you've done that, you come back to this controller and then you're going to hit the run the data quality checks. Now, if you have a large COC, this can take several minutes. So we go over here and we land on this data quality check report. We've got these little icons over here. Just like in your LSA, there are some things that are considered warnings. So they're things that we do not expect to be true. And then some are errors, which are things that cannot possibly be true. So for example, we do not expect there to be an unaccompanied youth that is under the age of 12 years old. This is somebody who is in a household where nobody is over the age of 12. If you click right here, it's going to give this little pop-up, and that is lame. I'll check on that. Interesting. I wonder if it's because I think it's because I have it open twice. Anyway, what should have happened is a window would pop up and give you the ID for that person. Now, if you have multiple issues like we do here, so we've got flagged records in a number of these rows, you can hit export all flagged records. And what's going to happen is it will give you, not that workbook, but this one over here. So each check is labeled down here. It only pulls up for the ones that are relevant, and then it gives you the information that you need to resolve that problem. So here we can see that this person entered prior to being born, which is not allowed, right? So even if their family came in prior, like, so on the 12th of May here, then they should have, by they, I mean this child, should have a start date of 7/3, even if the rest of the household has a start date of 5/12. Same thing here, what we just talked about, that unaccompanied person under the age of 12. This is the only person in the household. And you can see that they are, quite young. They're about a year old. Okay. So what kinds of things does the tool help you check? So we're looking for missing or invalid dates of birth. So this also looks for essentially if somebody is 112 years old, that's probably somebody entered the birth date incorrectly, right? So we'll flag that. Or if the data quality doesn't match what we're actually seeing in the field, that gets flagged. If you've got households where there is no head of household or households where there are multiple heads of household, if the head of household is missing a client location, if you've got a future exit date that's unexpected, then we have this possible missed exit date for emergency shelter. So you can go ahead and put in a value here. You can select from this drop down, and it will tell you if you would expect that people are not staying in your shelter beyond 365 days, it'll tell you, okay, but these 33 people did. So you might want to check to see if somebody forgot to put in an exit date, and that will flag there. Same thing for street outreach, which obviously street outreach is not part of the LSA, but it does provide that same functionality. So if you've got somebody who hasn't had a contact in 365 days, it will give you a list of those people, or you can back that up because maybe you actually want to look at people who haven't been contacted in 90 days because maybe it's appropriate to exit them at that point. Same sort of logic around a possible missed move-in date. So again, this is just a warning. We're not saying that it cannot take more than 180 days to house someone. I don't know, maybe it can. This is just like, if you want a list of people whose enrollments have been open for at least 180 days and they don't have a move-in date, it will generate this list for you. And then you can look into that and maybe send it to those projects and get some information from them about what needs to happen with that file and have them correct it. There's also if the housing move-in date is before the date that they entered the project, or the move-in date is after they've exited the project. If you have an enrollment that's active outside of the project's operating date, so let's say that the project only operated for calendar year 2021, and you got somebody who enrolled on February 15th of 2022, right? That project wasn't even open. That's not possible, so that's getting flagged. If they exited the project before they entered the project, we flag that. Then we get into these overlaps. So there's 4 different kinds. One is that you've got overlaps between projects that use entry and exit date to indicate household occupation. What that means is safe haven, entry, exit, emergency shelter, or transitional housing, right? So it's looking at those 3 project types to see if there are any conflicts. Then it looks at overlaps for a project that is using bed nights, so a night-by-night shelter, in comparison to any bed nights that are happening in other projects. Now, other projects that are not night-by-night, we consider a bed night because it's in between their entry and exit dates, right? So those are calculated bed nights versus actual logged service bed nights. Then we talk about overlaps between projects that are using that entry exit date or a bed night versus a move-in date. So this is a situation where maybe you're in emergency shelter from the 1st of the month to the 30th of the month. You enroll in rapid rehousing on the 10th of the month. You move in on the 20th of the month. All of a sudden, you've got 10 days at the end of that month where you are supposedly living both in shelter and rapid rehousing. That's not physically possible, so that's getting flagged. That last overlap is between projects that use a move-in date to exit date that indicate occupancy. So this is looking for things like you're enrolled and living in 2 different permanent supportive housing projects at one time. Any overlap there is considered an error. Okay. And then the last check that we do is just the sum of dedicated beds. So that's where you've got like, your chronic homeless, your youth, your veteran beds, etc. When you add those up, it should equal the total number of beds that you've got in those inventory records. That's the last check that is being done there. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and jump back into the PowerPoint for a couple more pieces of information for you. So, some folks have run into trouble in using this tool. So just a couple of tips. So again, making sure you got the right CSV. Make sure you've saved it in a secure location, and you must unzip the file. And then if the location appears to be empty, that's okay. Hit OK. It's just looking for the path. Now, to resolve some of those pain points, we are in the middle of testing for a new application that we've built. This was demoed on the HMIS admin call this month. So if you go to that page, you can find that webinar and get a preview of this tool that we're building. Some of the reasons that we've built this as a web-based application is because some folks can't access Excel because they don't have a Microsoft operating system. It has a number of other benefits as well in terms of, faster performance. It's no longer, relying on the amount of, power your personal machine has. It allows us to have some version control. You'll notice that we're on not version 1 anymore, at least for the DQ tool, right? And every time we publish an update, we sort of have to rely on people downloading the most recent copy, which is challenging. This way, we'll be able to just control a single version. And then we'll also have a public GitHub site where you can see the code itself, which is a lovely degree of transparency. I know that it's really helpful sometimes to find out, like, how is this actually being calculated when you're trying to solve for things. There's also a ton of new functionality that will be part of this application. There's a new project data descriptor element checker that's going to help you, especially with your LSA submissions. And there's some data visualizations to give you kind of a summary view of where your pain points might be. So we are very much looking forward to that. And just a heads up, that application is part of a larger project. So we've got a lot planned here for the coming next couple of years as we build this out. So we've got sort of 6 focus areas. We're building this system level dashboard, and we're going to kind of roll them out sort of in groups together. So the first thing that we're going to start tackling here in the new year is looking at system flow, all the way from coordinated entry to the end of your system, wherever that is, right? Then looking at those system level outcomes. Then we're looking at, for households who are listed as prioritized in your system, what are the unique characteristics of those folks, and like what percentage of them are unsheltered, and what do those referrals look like, and things like that. Then just your referrals in general, your assessment data in general, and then diversion and rapid exit. It's going to be a huge task, and we're super excited to dig in. One of the reasons that we're kind of rolling it out in that slower version is because we know that for those of you who are using your HMIS for coordinated entry, that those are fairly new data elements and that we're all sort of learning together. So we'll continue to build up the data quality functionality to support each one of those dashboards as well. So lots of really cool stuff coming, but I will allow us to focus back on the LSA, which is the moment that we're living in right now. Before I turn it over to Kira, I did want to pause and see, Kira, is there anything that I should answer verbally, or should I just jump over into the...
So we've been on a wild ride. Well, you've been talking, Jesse.
Cool.
So for you and for everyone else, we're not exactly sure if the Q&A function is working as expected. So those of you might have noticed that the chat is open. You can send questions to all panelists. If you have submitted a Q&A that hasn't been answered yet and it's been more than a couple minutes, I would go ahead and resubmit to the chat. And then that we are still getting some through the Q&A, so we are answering those as they come in. But Jesse, there were a couple, I don't know if you can answer this. Someone said that they're having trouble with the macros on the sheet, and someone mentioned wanting the GitHub link when it's ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we release the new app, that will come out with the GitHub link, and we'll also have it linked inside the app as well. So you'll have access to that. And then the other question about macros, I would encourage you to go ahead and put in an AAQ, and we can have our programmer reach out to you and help you with that. We have some instructions too that might get you there. So there was a change that Microsoft made recently regarding macros that is causing a little bit of heartache for folks. So we'll give you a couple of steps to try, and if not, then we'll jump on the phone with you and help you get it sorted out.
And then otherwise, we just have a thank you that the tool has been a great help in cleaning up data for the LSA. We appreciate the appreciation.
Absolutely. We do try to make your lives as easy as possible. Sometimes that works out. All right, Tara. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Take a look at your chat, but I think that's all the DQ tools specific questions. Okay, so yeah, as I said, we will stay on for another couple minutes answering questions, but oops, I will turn on my video again. And this recording and materials like Office Hours 1 will be posted hopefully more quickly than the first one. We're hoping by the end of this week, maybe early next week, before next week's office hours. These resource links, some of them we put in the chat. A lot of them are also linked in the Common Flags library that Victoria was showing you. If you have questions before this is updated, some of these are on last week's PowerPoint that are already up. But if you have questions about where to find any of these documents before it's posted on the HUD Exchange, feel free to reach out to your liaison and ask them about things, and they can get you connected. I sometimes have pretty good luck at typing in LSA and then whatever I'm looking for, but I know that sometimes it is harder to find on the HUD Exchange. So, or sorry, typing into Google, that is not on the HUD Exchange. And then next slide. I don't know if I have it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so our next office hours will be next Tuesday. We'll also have one in 2 weeks, and then we'll have 2 in January. The next office hours next week will be a little bit more of a Q&A style. Some of you might have noticed that in today's, the registration link for today's office hours, we included a what topics would you like to see in future office hours? Some people wrote in for that. The registration link for next week will also have an opportunity for you to write in. We will use all of those write-ins ahead of time and look them up and be prepared to talk about as many of those as we can. But you can also, like today and last week, come with your questions, and there'll be a little less. We might have some presented material based on what topics people want to see. Otherwise, we'll kind of dive in more into just common issues, questions, flags, things that you have put in the chat, specific questions, but also things that we've seen come up across regions a bunch, and would just think it might be helpful for more people to kind of talk through. We will also start all of our future office hours with kind of an update on where things are at, like Sean did today with the issues, etc. So you can come here for that. That will always be at the beginning, and we can dive more into some of those kinds of questions if people have them next week. Anything anyone else on the call wants to say? I will just say one last thing. If we haven't gotten to your questions yet, we will post with the materials a Q&A. The Q&A from week 1 was posted. We'll post these Q&A so you have all the answers to all these questions. And also, if we didn't get a chance to get to your question before we log off, it'll be in that document. Anyone else want to jump in with answers to some of the questions? I haven't been paying attention to the chat. We did record, so this is recording. I'm looking at the chat. Yeah. The recording should be up by next Monday, hopefully. There will be a listserv going out when the materials are posted from the HUD Exchange. Thank you again all for coming. We really appreciate you coming and appreciate all the work that you're doing. We know this is a crazy, hectic, sometimes difficult process, but we appreciate you engaging in it and hope to be as supportive and helpful as we can.